Hello and welcome back to American Cinema. So now we're moving into the 1980s and maybe some films that you're more familiar with. Coming out of the 70s, we have a dramatic hostage crisis of American citizens in Iran that really hurts the credibility of the Carter presidency. He loses in 1980 to Ronald Reagan, and he ushers in the Reagan Era. And that's why I've labeled this period the Reagan Era. Maybe more than any other president, his style and his influence on the country showed up very visibly in the films. We see a lot more patriotic and militaristic films, like Top Gun. We see a lot of nostalgic and sort of going back to the 50s. We see a lot of films set in the 50s, or we see even time travel back to the 50s in films, as we see in Back to the Future. So there's a real reduction of conservative values, traditional values. Reagan claims to want to bring in a new era of America, a new birth, a new day, a new dawn in America. All of this is part of his rhetoric, and he becomes known as the great communicator. Also during this time, though, he's becomes quite anti-government with his policies, and really leads to a lot of deregulation. And what we see as a result of that is a lot of scandals and theft and embezzlement in the corporate area. So, cultural values, what we see is a lot more consumerism and getting rich. These values we see expressed in Reagan cinema, and really Reagan cinema covers all the 80s. So some of what I'm saying will stretch into the late 1980s as well, with films like Wall Street, which we'll watch next week. Hollywood, like the rest of the society, kind of got greedy, and it really focuses on making money. They have a machine now coming out of the 70s, which is the blockbuster. And after Jaws and Star Wars, there are others like E.T. and one of the best ones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And these films are huge. They make a lot of money. They play in foreign markets. So the 80s is really a continuation of the blockbuster era. I mean, the blockbuster era really doesn't stop. I mean, we're kind of sort of still in it today, in a sense. That's what the MCU and all the superhero films are sort of tapped into. These large, big productions, lots of special effects that appeal to young people in particular. Also in the Reagan era, we see a couple other things. There's a lot of emphasis on time travel. We see a lot of teens getting in trouble. So whereas maybe in the 70s they were focused on college students and older, what we see now is a lot of films set in high schools, and teen protagonists become more the norm. Um, Also, let's see, home video, very very important. This is a major revolution in Hollywood in the 80s. Is now you can buy a VHS. You can record movies off television. Of course, cable TV, HBO are rolling now, but also you can, starting the age, you begin to be able to buy tapes. And so everyone's buying and renting movies. Now that changes the whole relationship. No longer are you going to the movie theater. Some movies you're less interested in, maybe you only rent. And so this creates a whole new revenue stream for Hollywood, which is huge, huge. It really begins to change their model. Now they're not just making money on the theatrical run, they're going to make money first selling you the movie and then renting it to you in perpetuity. So this begins to change the whole model, and films begin to be changed by VHS. For example, we see less widescreen and shorter films so that they can fit on the tape. Movies are almost in a way being made for the eventual place they're going to be viewed, which is on the home screen. And of course, this leads to declining attendance, particularly amongst older adults who just assume stay home on their nice big TV with a good stereo system and so forth to watch a movie. Okay. So, it also lastly changes the relationship the viewers have to movie. That now that they can own it, it isn't as special. It isn't something like an event you go to the movie theater. And of course, we see declining attendance, and that still continues to this day. So let's get into the films that we're going to cover. First up, Breakfast Club, focused on high school students. This is a seminal film. When this came out, it was revolutionary, very popular in its day. It's a comedy, really gets into teen archetypes, and has many films that copy it that come after. Next, we have Back to the Future, also a classic, very popular in its day, set in high school, has time travel, goes back to the 50s. Really kind of a perfect emblematic Reagan era film. And a lot of these films they're not as serious and as heavy. Let's remember coming out of the early 70s, we had a lot of the heavy films, the political undertones, not so much in the Reagan era, more blockbusters, more family fare, more spectacle films, more animated films, more films that are just really for family fun and they're not trying to make a big statement. Up next, we have Top Gun. Now, this is an example of Reagan era militarism and patriotism. Of course, the bad guys are the Russians in this. Reagan sort of re-energized the Cold War, whereas Carter had diminished its importance. Reagan re-energized that competition with with the Russians in the Cold War. So, Top Gun's really important in film history. It changes Hollywood's relationship to the Pentagon. Coming out of the 70s with films like Apocalypse Now, that film portrays the military in a bad light. They didn't like that. They didn't help on that film, but they gave lots of help to Top Gun. They let them use all their aircraft carriers, all the taxpayer dollars that went into the fuel. They allowed them to film all those scenes, and essentially the film became a recruitment video for the military, and military enrollment and military enlistment went up after that just because of that film. It really sort of changed that relationship, and henceforth Hollywood began having a permanent office the Pentagon, the military began having a permanent office in Hollywood so they can coordinate film efforts to portray the military in the most favorable light. All right, lastly, we have Die Hard, which is from the action genre. And this is a film that really epitomizes 80s films, which had a lot of tough guys, one man army going against all the bad guys, lots of special effects. Special effects in the 80s were really strong. They got better coming out of the 70s and blockbusters. So, stunts, special effects, visual effects, explosions, all that stuff got better and better and better. And Die Hard is an example of that. Okay, that wraps up this week's films. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you watch the video compilation, read your study guide, and reach out if you have any questions. Have a good week.